We are lucky to have her here to share her journey with us. Krista Glazer is also here. She is on the steering committee for the San Ramon Valley Diversity Coalition and is the Inclusion and Diversity Chair for the San Ramon Valley Council of PTAs, and also sits on the board of our local PFLAG. Her pronouns are she, her, hers. She will be facilitating your questions for Jeannie, which you can add in the comments section on Facebook under the live stream. We're learning to function in a virtual world, so if at any time we have technical difficulties, we will log right back on to continue. Speaking of technical help, we have Shayla Dixit here. Her pronouns are she, her, hers, and she is a member of the San Ramon Valley Diversity Coalition as well, and she's our tech help today. I'm going to turn it over to Jeannie now, who will share about herself and her journey. Please remember to submit your questions for her in the comment section for the Q&A period after she shares. Thank you for being here today, Jeannie.
Thanks so much for that lovely welcome. It's great to be here. Happy Pride Month, everyone. Yay. I'm coming to you from Rochester, New York, which is upstate near off of Lake Ontario. And I was asked to share a little bit about my my ally journey and a little bit about writing my book. And then the rest of the time is yours. So hoping you all have a lot of questions for me regarding my book and my work. Please call me Jeannie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I basically grew up in a very straight cisgender world, cisgender meaning not transgender. I didn't have anyone in my family or any close friends who were out about being LGBTQ+. I actually found out later that I had a lot of friends in high school who were LGBTQ+, but I knew they were not out at the time. I graduated from high school in 1981, if that gives you some idea. My graduating class was something like 600, or there wasn't a single out person, a single out LGBTQ plus person. It was just a very closeted world and not a very safe world or welcoming world at that time, even though I was in a pretty progressive area in New Jersey. I didn't meet my first gay, lesbian, and bisexual people who were out until college. And I didn't meet my first out trans person until I actually started volunteering at age 40 at our local LGBTQ plus center. So I actually am kind of a late bloomer as an ally, even though LGBTQ plus inclusion was just kind of a no-brainer for me my whole life. I never did anything about it. I didn't actually know the word ally in that context. I mean, we hear about ally work all the time now, but back in the day when I was younger, I wasn't familiar with that word, and I didn't know there was a role for me though. So in college, I remember there was these silence equals death marches. And even though I was on board, I never would have gone. I didn't have any connection there. So I just didn't do anything for a long, long time. And then a bunch of things came together for me in 2003. One was that my children were both little, had both started school. So my daughter went into preschool. My son was in maybe first or second grade. And so I suddenly had a little bit of time on my hands. I had been working full time, and then I took some time off to be a full-time parent. And I was ready to kind of go back and maybe do some volunteer work. I also was hearing my son coming back and sharing some things that he was hearing the boys teasing about at school around the kids being gay. And I was like, really? We're still there? I was kind of surprised about that. Marriage equality was also kind of newly in the media. And that was one of the first things that I was able to kind of latch onto and think, oh, there's something I can actually, help with, because in my ignorance, I just didn't even know what there was to do. And then the final thing that was an aha moment for me was my husband had given me this book for my 40th birthday about the women's suffragette movement. And I was reading that in bed one night, and I was doing that thing that I do when I read history. I don't know if y'all do this, but I put myself back in that time period. I imagine how would I have behaved? Would I have known certain things were right or wrong, or would I have just, been a part of that culture? And so I, of course, had convinced myself that I would be marching right alongside all those amazing women who fought for my right to vote. And it suddenly hit me what a hypocrite I was being. I'm like, you have felt strongly about LGBTQ plus inclusion your whole life. You haven't done a thing about it. And here you are imagining yourself involved 100 years ago. What the heck? So it was such a strong impression that the next morning it was still with me. And when I woke up, I looked up the word gay in the phone book. Anybody remember the phone book? Anyone old enough to remember? I literally looked up gay in the phone book because I'm like, I don't know what's out there. And I found our organization, which at the time was called the Gay Alliance, believe it or not, a very non-inclusive name, which we ended up later changing to the Out Alliance. But at the time it was the Gay Alliance, found them, picked up the phone, said, hi, can I volunteer? And I ended up volunteering there for 2 years. And then they hired me as staff after 2 years. And I ended up total staying there for 15 years. I was put in charge of the education program. I eventually became the education director there. And when I first started there, I knew nothing about the LGBTQ plus communities. And I really wanted a guidebook. Can someone just tell, is there a book out there that can tell me like what to say and what not to say and how not to mess up? There wasn't one. You can see where I'm going with this. So after 15 years working at the Out Alliance, in charge of all of their educational programs, writing their curriculum, training all the speakers, I had so much great stuff in my head that when I ended up leaving there after 15 years, I just was like, this stuff has to get out there. I mean, it's just so good, stuff about like how to be an active ally. So the next thing I did was I actually looked to see what else was out there in the world as far as books, because writing a book was never really something that was, a goal of mine. I certainly had no intention of reinventing the wheel if the book I imagined was already out there. So I did a search to see what was out there. And although there are many, many fabulous books out there for allies, what I found was the book I was picturing was not really out there. And so here's why. Here's what makes mine a little different. First of all, most of the books that I found that said they were for how to be an ally ended up being about like 70% why to be an ally and then like some action stuff at the end. And I really wanted mine to be 100% action. So I'm like, don't pick up my book if you're not on board with LGBTQ plus inclusion. I'm like, I was kind of tired of trying to convince people. I'm like, if you're on board and you just want the skills to be an active and effective ally, then pick up my book. And so my goal was to just make it 100% action. The other thing that I found with the books that I was reading, a lot of them were very, very heavy academic books. And I really wanted mine to be really accessible and also just a book that people wanted to read. Like, I don't want it to be like a heavy slog. So I tried to make it fun. I think I made it funny, but who knows? I added some humor where I could. I have fun pop quizzes, and I just tried to make it like encouraging and fun to read. And then the final thing that I found, and this was definitely not true of all the books that I found that I was reading, but some of them had a very, very shaming tone, very unforgiving of mistakes, and often these daunting lists of like, you need to check off all these things before you can call yourself an ally. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and also, you have to do it 24/7. And I'm like, okay, first of all, with all the things vying for our time in our lives, caring for children, caring for parents, full-time jobs, who could possibly do this 24/7? And I do this literally full-time. I'm a full-time ally and I can't check all these boxes. So who the heck can? They're intimidating, they're daunting, they're just horrible for people who are just starting out. What about those folks that are like, I want to be an ally, but I'm nervous, and they just are starting to dip their toe in? I'm like, being an ally is an ongoing journey. And we are going to make mistakes. Like, you have to just embrace the fact that you're going to make mistakes. We have to get comfortable with that. And so that was one of the big reasons I wanted to write my book, was I wanted it to just be like helping people understand that you're going to mess up. So we have to figure out how to make an appropriate apology, how to get it right the next time, how to forgive ourselves, and then, oops, we mess up again. And so, it's a forgiving book. And as I said, it's a very encouraging book. So I wrote it very quickly, actually. I mean, I just had all this stuff in my head and it was just a fast write. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the publishing process, in case you're interested about writing. So I read some, information on like how I have to find an agent, and I just read a lot of horror stories about how difficult this is. And I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm just self-publishing. Like I had convinced myself I wasn't going to publish traditionally. And then a friend of mine actually came to me and said that a lot of academic publishers and smaller publishers are looking for new authors and new ideas, and you don't necessarily need an agent. And so I was like, okay, let me try that. And so once I had written a book proposal, which you basically have to write this sort of long book proposal, you're kind of selling your book and a few sample chapters. I sent that out to a bunch of publishers, and I actually had 2 publishers who were interested in my book. They got into a little tiny bidding war, which was super flattering, really tiny, but it was still flattering. And I went with an agency called Roman and Littlefield because my editor, Mark, was just like positively giddy over my book, which was adorable. And he also really liked the name of it. The other agency wanted to change the name to something really generic, like a book for how to be an ally or something. And I just really liked the Savvy Ally. I thought that was like really clever. And I just, my website is Savvy Ally Action, and I'm just having a lot of fun with that title. So anyway, I went with Roman and Littlefield, and then they published it on March 12th, 2020, if you can all picture that. It was like day 1 of the national shutdown. So don't do that. If with your first book, don't launch it during the beginning of a pandemic. That was really sad. It basically, my book launch canceled, all my workshops canceled. It took a really long time to really get the ball rolling. And I was very thankful for PFLAGs, for example, who, were inviting me in to do some book talks. And I'm thankful to be here today, just because it really helps get the word out and gets my book into the hands of readers who want to read it. Since that time, things have really started to move along with my book, and I was really, really honored to find out that Teaching Tolerance, an organization that's near and dear to my heart, they chose my book as their staff pick for their spring magazine in the area of professional development. So that was like, oh, I made it. That was a really wonderful honor. So word's starting to get out, and I'm having a ton of fun with workshops. I really went into the virtual workshop thing kicking and screaming. Didn't want to do it. I was like, nope, my superpower is connecting with people, and I don't want to do it. And my sister, actually, who lives in LA, out in your area, West Coast anyway, she was like, Jeannie, the whole world right now is looking for like virtual workshops on diversity. What are you doing? And I'm like, okay. So I started doing them, and I'm actually having a ton of fun with them. So if anyone needs a workshop on how to be a Savvy Ally, please go to my website at Savvy Ally Action and check out some of the workshops that I can offer. And I guess that's it about me. I really would like to spend most of the time just letting people ask questions and having some conversation. So I'll stop there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jeannie. I really appreciate that. A little bit about background on you and why you wrote the book and the writing process. It's all really interesting. And I want to just add, if you do have questions, go ahead in Facebook. You can put them in the comment section, and we will grab them from there. I did want to ask a little bit around kind of getting into that definition of Savvy Ally. And I just have a kind of a question specifically around the definition of ally, which is, do you feel like the definition of ally means that by definition allies are both cisgender and heterosexual?
I do not. In fact, right at the beginning of my book, in the first chapter, I define the word ally, and I define ally broadly. I think, within an LGBTQ plus context, most people think of people like myself who are straight and cisgender, and yay, like great, we're out there and we're doing great things. But no, ally, a lesbian can be an ally, a cis lesbian can be an ally to the trans communities. A white trans man can be an ally to trans women of color who, as we know, are marginalized and victimized in much different ways. So, even if you're part of the LGBTQ plus communities, you absolutely can be an ally to others within those communities. And so I talk about that in my book. And it's actually one of the most flattering things that I get to hear at the end of workshops when a person from the LGBTQ plus communities comes up to me and says, like, I can't believe how much I learned, about people within my community that I don't know, because it actually, there's so many different kinds of people under the LGBTQ plus umbrella, that are so different. And so just learning about the different communities and knowing how to support them is important. So yeah, no, ally, I define very broadly.
And then how would you add the savvy piece onto it? So what is it specifically about a savvy ally versus just an ally or an unsavvy?
Well, I like the way it sounded, Savvy Ally. Actually, I was a little worried people were going to think that I was saying that I was the Savvy Ally, kind of like, like Dear Abby, like I know everything. So I actually, when I came up with my website, I called it Savvy Ally Action because I didn't want people to think that I was the savvy ally. But savvy actually, I liked the way it sounded, but I actually had to look it up because I was under the impression, and I'm not sure if others are, that yes, it means knowledgeable and skilled, but I also thought it kind of meant a little bit like cunning, which it doesn't. So actually in the beginning of my book, I define savvy like right at the beginning, just in case anyone's wondering about that. But it just means skilled and knowledgeable. And to me, that's what this book is about, is handing people the skills that they need to become effective. Not only as allies in sort of supporting folks within the LGBTQ+ communities, but also in educating other allies. So I do talk a lot in my book about the importance of ally to ally conversations, and what a great gift that is to create spaces where people can mess up, ask silly questions without feeling like jerks. And most of the time people don't want to do that in front of the marginalized community members. They're so scared that they're going to be accidentally offend someone, and people can really just relax when they're in conversation with people like them. And especially if you're an ally who's messed up in the same way. One of the tips that I share about a great way to connect with people when you're having ally to ally conversations is, if you've messed up in the same way, just start with that. Just say like, oh my gosh, I messed up their pronoun last week too. I feel so bad, but here's a trick that I've been doing that's been helping me. Then it's just a connecting statement. And again, I think those ally to ally conversations are important. A lot of my book has to do with how do we educate others in a way that really opens up their ears rather than shuts them down and makes them defensive.
Great, thank you. Another question was around this topic of like what questions are okay to ask and what questions are too much. And I know that people have a lot of questions about people's background, sexual orientation, gender identity. And like the example I would give is like, I've had many people ask about my wife and I having our son, and basically the phrase has been, where did you get him from? Or how did you make him? And so I'm just curious, kind of like, at what point are the questions okay to ask? And then at what point is that just too much?
Ooh, yeah, okay. Well, so, obviously from question to question, it's going to vary. I think probably my favorite tip that I can offer you along those lines is my switch it technique. So I use this throughout the book, and I find myself using it constantly. I move through the world using the switch it technique all the time. And it's really handy as a self-coaching tool to be like, should I ask this question or is this not okay? Or also to educate other people who maybe have asked a question that's a little offensive and you might be able to help. So the switch it basically is like, let's switch that to, the majority population. So let's see, are we going to ask a lesbian couple about where their kid came from? Like, would I ask a straight couple that? Like, probably not. And so there's your tip, right? Some other examples I've given is like, like, so I've lived 58 years as a straight woman. Never once has someone asked me like, Jeannie, how do you know you're straight if you've never been with a woman? And that's, of course, something that lesbians get asked very often, is like, well, how do you really know if you've never been with a guy? So we switched that and we realized, oh, actually that's kind of offensive. A trans question I like to give an example of is, like, oh, people somehow always often make assumptions about trans folks that the assumption is that they want to fit back into that binary. So a trans woman must want to express her gender in a very feminine way, and a trans man must want to express his gender in a very masculine way. And so people are often giving these tips, like, bro, if you sit this way, you'll look more like a dude, or like, let me help you with some makeup tips. And again, there's a switch it. One of the things that I share was, I actually told you I graduated in 1981 from high school. That was also the last time I wore makeup. Wasn't that the 1981 school prom? So I'm like, that means my entire working career, I have not worn makeup. Not once has someone come up to me and said, Jeannie, if you put a little lipstick on, you'd look a little more feminine. Not only has no one said that, but I'd be really offended if someone said that to me. And so of course we want to give our trans friends the same respect. Obviously, if someone comes up to you and asks for tips, then go have fun, go do a makeover. But we shouldn't make assumptions about trans folks and how they want to express their gender any differently than we would with cis folks. So long story short, to answer that question, I think the switch it technique can really help us it guides us in like, is this okay to ask? And it also can help us educate others on those questions.
That's
And
helpful.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry you get asked that all the time.
I get a lot of, can I ask? And then it's dot,
Yeah.
dot. That's helpful though. I like the switch it technique. We have a question from Facebook. How do you venture into the minefield of explaining LGBTQIA plus to a strong traditional conservative?
Oh boy, really? Okay. This is why I wrote the book for people who are already on board. I've had my fair share of sort of head-banging conversations. Okay. Rather than sort of like, what would I say? Let me talk a little bit about my chapter 9. So chapter 9 in my book is, do I have that right? I think it's chapter 9. It's called Good Talk, The Art of Useful Conversations. Yes, no, I'm wrong. It's chapter, okay, it doesn't matter. I have a chapter in my book called, called Good Talk, The Art of Useful Conversations. And the entire chapter is, actually has nothing to do with LGBTQ plus at all. It's basically, how do we have conversations with people who think differently than we do? So whoever asked that question, I would recommend that you pick up my book and at least read that chapter. But one of the things that I talk about, I'll share a little bit. I start with the fact that all of us have spent our lifetimes creating what I call our lump of knowledge in our brain. And it's all the stuff that we know. And I'm saying no in air quotes because it's what we think is correct. It may or may not be correct, but it's what we know. And we're very, very stubborn about changing that. And for good reason. Humans are very resistant learners, and we have to be, because there's a lot of bad information out there. We couldn't move through the world like just every time we get a new piece of information, putting it in and replacing it with what used to be there. I mean, our lives would be chaos. And as we know, there's a lot of like bad info out there. So humans in general are really, really resistant learners, and they're resistant to change that lump of knowledge. And so understanding that, I think, really helps us to have conversations, because I often get the question, kind of like what was asked here, like in a workshop, like my uncle is so homophobic. He says the most horrible things, what can I say to him to change his mind? And the answer is nothing. There's no one thing you can say to this person to change their mind. They've got a lifetime of the lump of knowledge, right? All we can do is, have conversations with people respectfully, listen, share, plant seeds potentially, so that down the line they may hear something else, and then they may hear something else, and then that's how people learn. And so I think that's good news, because I think it really takes the pressure off of our shoulders of coming up with that like perfect, succinct, angels singing in the background, comment that's going to change someone's mind, because that's not how people learn. So to me, I actually really embrace not someone who's not respectful. I don't enjoy those conversations at all. I actually hate conflict, but I actually really enjoy talking with people who think differently than I do, if they're willing to do it respectfully. I find it fascinating. And I just think I end up with so much more respect for people, whether we think the same way about things or not. I just learned so much about people. And I just think it's such a respectful thing to do, is just create spaces where we can talk with people who think differently than we do. I share a story in my book about a person in one of my workshops who pushed back against the work that I was doing, but he did it so respectfully and so soft-spoken. It took me a minute to realize that he was like offended by the work I was doing. And I did something I had never done before. I gave him my card at the end of the workshop, and I said I'd like to take him out to dinner. And I share that story in my book, and I talk about that experience, and like it really stands as like one of the most incredible educational experiences I've had, was my dinner out with this man named Lou. And when I got in the car that night after we had our talk, and we had a wonderful talk and we hugged goodbye, I'm like, I don't think either one of us budged an inch on our core beliefs. I really don't, but we left with so much more respect for each other. And we had so much in common. That was really shocking to me too. I learned a lot from him. So I'm sorry to disappoint. I don't have a great answer that's going to change anyone's mind, because that's not really how people learn. But I do encourage people to get out there and just have respectful conversations, and just share what you know and what you think, and listen to other people too.
You think it's different if it's a family member? Like if you have a family member who makes a homophobic or a transphobic comment, both as an ally or, and I guess I should say as an ally and as an LGBTQ plus person, what could be the approach to that, given the fact that it's a unique family dynamic?
I think it shouldn't be different, but I think it is different. I think family, you just have different reactions with family. You know, I remember when Caitlyn Jenner first transitioned, and my mother like would not stop calling her by her old name over and over and over. And it just, I don't know why, it just got under my skin. And I got so angry at her. And my husband's like, Jeannie, don't you do this for a living? I was like, I know, but it's my mother. I'm like, here I am teaching this stuff to other people, but somehow when it's your own family member, it's like, yeah, you know, but I mean, on the flip side, I also think, you know, I had a woman in a workshop talking to me about how her daughter was getting married, and on the wedding invitation, she wanted to write a very traditional, like Mr. and Mrs., you know, so-and-so. And this woman was saying she thought that was like a really gendered thing to do. And she was sort of pushing back on her daughter. And I'm like, and also it's your daughter's wedding. You know what I mean? I mean, we just have to, like, yes, have conversations, but we also have to really respect each other. And I just can't imagine a family feud over the invitations over your daughter's wedding. Like some things, and the same, I've had the same things with friends who really dislike the gender reveal parties. You know, those things where like you cut the cake and all of a sudden everything's gendered and the pink and the blue. And you know, and again, I'm like, don't lose a friendship over this, even though it's not your thing. You know, just have conversations. So I agree. I think it's harder, certainly harder when it's family members. But there's also more at stake, you know, because they are your family. So
Yeah, definitely more complicated. So another comment from Facebook: we are totally new to this. Our trans daughter has just started telling a few friends about now being a woman. What is the best way to support her, and how do I learn more about being a better ally? Of course, your book. And I am particularly anxious about school starting in September.
I was like, yeah, is this a true question? Read my book. Yeah, there are a lot of great tips in my book for being respectful to trans folks, and again, educating others. Well, first of all, thank you so much for supporting your daughter. You know, not always easy. I think the best way that you can support her, probably that's a question for her, because that's just an individual question, is just to continue to stay in touch with her and say, what can we do to help, you know, because that may change over time, and you really want that to be coming from her. You don't want to be sort of jumping in places that maybe she doesn't feel comfortable. You know, as far as the school, I would recommend some education. I don't know if they've done that or not, but I have, I found that in general, and you know, we're in a different area here, you know, and there's different regions have different levels of acceptance for sure. But I find in general that teachers are they just want to do the right thing. They just want to care for their kids and create welcoming spaces. And so the trainings are really fantastic. If you can help advocate for the teachers and the school staff to have some training around pronouns and around, you know, of course, the restroom issue, which everybody gets all bent out of shape about, and just give them the tools that they need, mostly for supporting your child with language. Because if you've got a teacher who is using the correct name and the correct pronoun, that's going to just change the culture right there. But if you've got a teacher who's, you know, constantly using an old name and tripping up, the kids aren't going to take it seriously. The kids are going to be confused. So I think that's a huge thing, is to talk with the administration about whether you can get some training in there. And go to actually, you can start by going to my website at Savvy Ally Action. I have a bunch of free goodies there. I have a lot of handouts that are free to download and just distribute wherever the heck you want. And one of them has to do with how to create inclusive schools. And there might be some tips there that also might be able to get you started.
Great, thank you. I saw, yeah, there were podcasts and videos and lots of great stuff.
Oh, there's so much now. Yeah.
So you mentioned that your book was published on March 12th, 2020, and the world has completely changed since then. Sorry to bring up that moment.
Pain.
So it's been now over a year. And so I'm curious if you've sensed that anything since COVID has impacted the LGBTQ plus community and the role of allies. Do you see anything different now than when you wrote the book?
It's mostly stuff that I'm hearing. I heard it was a really tough time for LGBTQ plus youth. They're already at a higher risk for attempted suicide. So I don't know. I mean, I'll just rattle off some quick statistics in case you're not familiar with this. But gay, lesbian, bisexual youth are about 3 times as likely to attempt suicide as their straight counterparts. And the trans community, the numbers there are outrageous. I think it's something like 40% of trans individuals have attempted suicide from that 2015 enormous transgender study that was done. And I think that what I have been hearing is, and again, I've been fairly isolated myself in my daughter's bedroom running workshops. So this is really mostly just hearsay, but and stuff that I've been reading that it's been a really tough year for youth because they don't have that outlet. If they don't have supportive parents, that creates a really tough situation where you can't get out to be with your friends and your peers and at school. So I think that was certainly a change that I heard about within the communities. But again, I felt pretty isolated myself, and I don't have any LGBTQ plus kids in my family. My children are both straight and cisgender, so it's mostly just what I was reading. Yeah.
Would you envision writing any kind of follow-up book or a future book on another topic?
Yeah. On another topic, probably not. I'm not that versatile. I know about volleyball, but I'm a volleyball player. That's about it. No, well, I actually have my heart set on a second edition, and the book is actually doing so well that my editor has agreed that that's going to happen. I don't know how quickly that's going to happen. The book's only just over a year old, so most of what I'm reading about says most people won't write a second edition until the book's at least 2 or 3 years old. And that's fine because I mean, my copy of this book is just like filled with little notes. I'm just constantly tweaking my language. One of the things that I did to try and sort of keep up an interest in my book during a really difficult time was that I create these little 3-minute videos that have Savvy Ally tips. And they're on my website. They're on my YouTube channel called Savvy Ally Action. Like why share your pronouns? What's up with singular they? I just did one on straight pride, why it isn't a thing for Pride Month. I'm not having a ton of fun with them, but the point is that as I'm creating these, even the language, I'm spending so much time on the nuanced language that I'm like, oh, I could have said that better. And I'm going back and I'm right, So there's big concepts that I think I want to add to my book, but there's also just constant tweaking. So yes, I'm definitely going to do a second edition. And then my editor actually was kind of excited about the idea of doing like a Savvy Ally for teachers, Savvy Ally for medical professionals. I'm not sure I'm savvy enough to do any of those, but the one for teachers. I feel like I could write a whole book. A visitor. I feel like I could write an entire new book on teaching because most of the folks that I actually talk to are teachers, and I just think they've got such interesting challenges. I mean, they're out there doing it, and the stuff that they're experiencing. Some of them are teaching me stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, new identities I haven't heard of, and so that's possibly brewing. Is a Savvy Ally for teachers, but the second edition is definitely brewing. And I think if I don't end up doing the teachers edition in my second edition, I'm going to add either a chapter or an appendix that has specific things for different groups of people. So for medical professionals, for therapists, for teachers, for parents, you know what I mean? So at least a few pages of like, this content is just for you. So.
That's awesome. I love the idea of the Savvy Ally for educators. I think that's awesome. All right, looks like we just had another question come in through Facebook, so let me grab that. All right, so wondering what was your inspiration for advocating for our LGBTQ plus community? I know you talked a little bit about that at the beginning, but what specifically would you say, like if you had to kind of distill it down for like what that inspiration was? What do you feel like that was for you?
Sure I can answer that. I mean, it definitely was reading that book was like, let's go, Jeannie, like it's time. But Wow. I mean, it's funny because I didn't, I didn't have anyone in, I'm not sure if this person was here when I was talking about like having no one in my life who identified as LGBTQ plus. However, when I was 10 years old, I actually write about this in my prologue. I was at Serendipity Restaurant in New York City. I don't know if anyone knows of this place, like amazing little restaurant. Do you know about it? It was one of my favorite restaurants when I was a kid. And when I was 10, I don't know how they did this because it seems like a lawsuit waiting to happen, but apparently all of the servers were gay men. That was kind of their signature thing. I don't think that's true anymore. Actually, the last few times I've been in there have been women, but it was all gay men. And when I was 10 years old, my mother leaned across the table and she said to me, did you know that all the servers here are gay? And I didn't. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I like wrote this goofy little thing about how like gay men are like really nice and they bring you great food. So obviously they're superior human beings. But that was kind of my first thing that I can remember. And the fact that it was so normalized, like my mother it wasn't derogatory. She wasn't like, did you know, like gossipy. It was just a thing. And I was like, so being gay was just like being straight. It was just different. You know what I mean? So my parents were gay was not a naughty word in our house. Like, we didn't talk about it a lot, but when we did, it was just what it was. I remember Billy Crystal on a show called Soap. He was kind of like the first out gay man in like primetime television. I'm really dating myself here. I think this was probably like the late 70s. And he was like the best character ever. I don't know. I just got this really positive, certainly no negative, feelings at all about LGBTQ plus folks. And I think so again, I don't want to retell the story, but, I did have sort of an epiphany of like that. I've felt strongly that LGBTQ plus inclusion my whole life, hadn't done anything about it. But it's interesting. I think back about like why LGBTQ plus, for example, and why not like racial issues, with Black Lives Matter just like exploding over the last year in that fantastic way, in my humble opinion. I've actually been educating myself a lot more on racial justice. And I actually think it was ignorance on my part. I think because when I talked about my kid coming home and the boys were teasing about being gay, I think in my ignorance, I somehow thought that this is an issue and maybe not race because the kids aren't teasing each other about racial issues, which, as I know now, was completely ignorant on my part because I really wasn't understanding systemic racism. And so I've learned a lot since then, but I think that that's partly why I didn't go into racial justice at that point, just on my own part. But yeah, I guess the other thing is as I said, my children were both school age and it was time for me to get back into the workforce. And I just wanted to do something that they were proud of, that I was proud to tell them about that I was doing. I don't know, all those things came together.
I'm sure they are. Question.
Thank you.
Question from Facebook. Some states have made some extremely biased legislations. How do you, as an author, support LGBTQIA plus students and young adults who are affected by those bills that are out there? I think I know for sure Texas, and I'm sure some other states as well.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think, from Rochester, New York as an author, mostly what I can do is just inform people. And I do that through a lot of my workshops. I actually just created a new workshop called 5 Things Allies Should Know About Pride. And one of the things that I talk about, and I talk about in my book too, is like, I think with marriage equality passing, a lot of people are like, oh, aren't we in a good place now? Like really, like just like, don't we have LGBTQ plus rights in place? Well, actually, no, we don't. On a federal level, we don't actually have, those protections are not in place. We had the employment, of course, came through when was that, in 2020? I can't remember what month it was, but housing, schools, there's still the rights aren't there, the laws aren't there to protect LGBTQ plus people. So it's really just educating folks and making helping people understand that we're not actually in a good place. And it shocks some people. They're like, wait, this is America. Like everybody has their rights. Okay. So yeah, I just do a lot of just helping people, figure out that we're not where we should be with those rights. And I agree, this has been an unbelievably horrendous year, especially around anti-trans legislation. Yeah, I just can't understand it's funny. I understand the sports one. That's the first one that I kind of get. like only because I'm like, I could see if it was like, you know, if you're a parent and your kid doesn't make the volleyball team because some trans woman does and she's 6 feet tall, like I could kind of see where someone might think that was unfair. Not that I agree with it, because I think that, you know, kids should just be able to play. And I think that it's more important to show sportsmanship than I keep saying sportsmanship, and it's sportspersonship sounds so funny. It's the one word I can't ungender because it sounds so weird, but you know, anyway, I just think it's more important to teach kids how to be good sports than, you know, like let everyone play. I mean, that's what sports is about, is, you know, connecting with teammates and having that experience. But I just don't understand the bathroom stuff. And I try and do a lot of education around that as well. Like people are just, I think, really confused about that. So.
I had a question about the action piece, and so I know that you talked about like you really wanted the book to focus 100% on action, and so for our audience watching today, if there's some takeaways of like, here's an action that I can take when I get off of Facebook, what would 1 or 2 or 3 of those be that you would recommend?
Well, I actually love those action pieces that people can do like as soon as you shut Zoom off. I have one of my workshops, which has become the most popular, is called LGBTQ plus etiquette and common bloopers. And it's just like 100% actionable language tips, like stuff you can change, creating more safe places just with your language. And so I'll share a few with you right now. So 2 of my favorites work really well together. One is ungender your language, which sounds really simple, but I actually like to take a moment when I talk about it to like, let's freeze that moment when we use gendered language and look at what we do to LGBTQ plus people. I give an example in my book of a young man named Jonathan, who is a friend of mine, who went to our local grocery store, ran in to grab some flowers for his boyfriend. And this cashier, very kindly, of course, just trying to make conversation, said, "Oh, those are so beautiful. Are they for your wife?" Right? So now if he's buying them for his wife, he's going to move through that conversation like no problem. But he was buying them for his boyfriend. And this cashier literally has boxed him into a corner with that language. Like he suddenly has to make a decision about whether he's going to come out or not to the cashier, right? He runs into the grocery store for flowers, and now he's faced with a situation where he's got to come out or not. So he has 3 options, right? He can lie and say, "Yes, they're for my wife," and just move on, right? He can deflect, like, "Ooh, I think you dropped my tomato," or he can come out to the cashier. And whether he does that or not is going to depend on like what kind of vibes he's getting from her, what the environment is, who else is around possibly listening. He's got to make this split-second decision. You know, anyone who thinks coming out is like this fabulous day where music is playing, you know, like it's not. It's a lifelong journey, partly because of our gendered language. So I really like to take the time to kind of just walk through what that's like for people when we put them on the spot. So ungendering language, I think, is huge. I think, you know, if you're not walking around with a big old rainbow pin on your shirt, which I highly recommend, it's kind of the next best way that you can tell people that you're open to hearing that they are anyone, you know, that their loved ones are anyone. It's just a beautiful thing to do. And one of my tips along those lines is, again, I really try and take a very encouraging and forgiving approach. And I find people can get very hard on themselves, allies who are trying to do the right thing. Take it one at a time. I mentioned I was a volleyball player. I also coach volleyball. I'm like, if I try and teach some girl how to like do an approach dump and hit the ball, and I'm like, and then your feet do this, and then your knees do this, and then you got to reach high and pull your arm back, and then you're going to contact the ball here. It's like, it's too much. But if I just say like, forget about everything else, all you're going to do is work on ball contact for this drill, just ball contact, right? She picks it right up. So the same thing I think is true with our language tweaks. It's like, think about one thing that you say all the time. Like maybe you're saying boys and girls in class, you know, your teacher, and you say boys and girls, you're like, I'm going to say students. I'm going to say students. Just work on that until you get it down, and then move on to another, rather than trying to change everything. So that one is ungendered language is great. And then the second one that I like that kind of works really well in combination with that is mirror terms. So mirror the terms that people are using for themselves and their loved ones. We don't actually need to know all the identities that are out there. And it's really intimidating. If you ever read those glossaries with the millions of identities, I mean, people get really, I think they get they get silenced by their fear that they're going to mess up and not know enough terms. But all you really need to do is sort of listen and mirror. So the way those two work really beautifully together is, I might say, like, hey, I'm having a party, spouses and partners are welcome. And then my friend says, oh, great, I'll bring my wife. Now she's just given me valuable information about how to be respectful to her. I wouldn't shift back to that ungendered term of partner or spouse. I would latch onto that word that she just used of wife and mirror that and say, oh, great, I'm looking forward to meeting your wife. So those two, I think, work really, really well together. I'm not sure why within the LGBT, when people talk about LGBTQ plus folks, they often get very focused on that word partner, and then they stick to it. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, your partner. Yeah, my wife. Yeah, your partner. Yeah, my wife. So that's also not really respectful. So you want to listen to the terms people are using and mirror them. So those, I really like those two. They work really, really well together. Another one that I mentioned is my switch it technique, which we talked about earlier. That's a really nice one. That's like a little savvy tip. I have some tips on like how to get pronouns right. I don't know how long we want to go with this one, but
I cannot tell you how many times I've said my wife and I get back, so your partner, right? And that's such an interesting part around like the mirroring of language, that if someone hears you say wife, you should reflect back wife. If someone says partner, reflect back partner. Partner always made me think of business partner. It was just such an odd term that was, there's got to be
yeah,
spouse or something else out there, right?
yeah.
Do you
And
want to
actually,
talk?
it's funny.
Oh, go ahead.
I had to navigate the partner thing too. I'll share kind of a funny story about being, one of the only straight cis women working at our LGBTQ plus center. I mean, everybody assumed I was either a lesbian or a trans woman. And I remember, which was fine. And in some ways I was more comfortable with that, just because I was like, sort of part of the community. But at one point someone said that I should use the word partner rather than husband. And I did that for a while, because that was the term they were asking me to use. And then I was like, this feels so deceptive. I mean, I'm working at the Out Alliance, I wear Birkenstocks. I'm like, now I'm talking about my partner. It's like I'm intentionally hiding who I am, which also felt odd, So I actually switched back to husband intentionally, because I'm like, I just feel like I'm being deceptive. And so I absolutely use it as a gender neutral term, but I was like, husband feels comfortable. And of course, husband felt way more comfortable once marriage equality passed. And I knew others had the ability to marry. So that just kind of took care of that. But I had an interesting relationship with the word partner too.
You were going to share a little bit about pronouns. There's another question, but I wanted to make sure that if there was anything you wanted to share about pronouns, that I made sure I gave you the
Oh,
for that.
yeah, no, that's fine. Let's take another question and we can go
Okay,
back
we
to
can
pronouns.
come back to that.
Mhm.
So as allies, how do we ensure that we center the voices of the LGBTQ plus community and not overpower it or overtake it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. How do we ensure that? Well, it sounds like you're already aware of the fact that we should be, amplifying voices. I think, always finding out what's needed, what role you can play rather than sort of, stepping in. I think the more we educate ourselves, the more able we are to create. Again, I think those big like full paycheck gifts are the ally to ally conversations. I think that's really where we can shine. So, of course, if I go to a Black Lives Matter rally or whatever, I'm sitting back. Tell me what role I should play. Tell me what to do. This is not my show. But I think on a one-on-one basis, you hear someone at work saying something like using a little outdated term, or maybe they just didn't get the memo. Those are just great opportunity. I don't think we need permission from someone within the LGBTQ plus communities to, help educate maybe another potential ally about a respectful term, if we know that. So I think people get a little confused by that, but I'm like, there's certainly roles that allies can play. To me, that's a gift that we can give to the LGBTQ plus communities, because the marginalized community members should not be responsible for having to educate, all the time about their identities. And so it's a great role for allies to step in if you're comfortable and if you're aware of the fact that that word is maybe ouchy, to do that education. So
Great, thank you. Do you want to loop back to pronouns? I want to make sure we address that.
Oh,
So,
yeah, I mean, people tend to have a lot of questions about pronouns, sort of like how to ask for pronouns is a huge question these days. I think everybody's becoming really much more aware of pronouns. And it's funny because there's sort of like by the book, and then there's what actually happens in real life. And actually, I find very few people actually are like coming out and asking people what their pronouns are. I actually think it's a little invasive. So I think some people have pulled back on that. It used to be like, ask everyone their pronouns, but there are people who don't feel comfortable sharing their pronouns. And so I actually come up with some ways that I think sort of gets around that. So I'll share some of the different ways that I like to find out how to respectfully refer to people. The first thing is, if at all possible, the ideal way to collect pronouns is to collect them on everyone. So I always talk about like creating systems that work for everyone. So if you're in a workplace, for example, anytime you do that go around, maybe you have a new staff member or an intern and you're doing that, like say your name and a little bit about what you do, that should be a time that you should be allowing people to share their pronouns if they feel comfortable. And again, it should be optional. We shouldn't be forcing anyone, but it should just become a natural part of what we're sharing. Name, pronoun. We did it tonight. It was really, really lovely. Forms, as you're filling out forms, if you'd like to share your pronoun. I also think we should be collecting information on everyone about like honorifics, like how can I introduce you formally and how can I introduce you casually? Like how do we know if someone's a Mrs. or a Ms. or a Miss, a doctor or a mix, or we have no idea unless we ask them. And we should be asking everyone, not just the folks who were like not quite sure, because that gets really awkward. So the first thing is definitely like create systems where you're getting that information from everyone who wants to share it. And then like even put it on your staff list, right? Like, here's how you should be addressing people. Here's pronouns if people feel like sharing those. When we talk to people one-on-one, we don't need pronouns. Most people are aware of that, right? We don't actually need to know. We may be curious, but again, that's a situation where curiosity shouldn't overtake our being respectful in our language. We really don't need to know someone's pronouns if we're talking directly to them, because you use the words you and we. Only a few times have I been in a situation where I have felt that in order to be respectful, I really kind of need to ask this person their pronouns and not their pronouns, but how to refer to them. And the way I do that is I always offer mine first. I think that's a little bit less jarring. It reminds me a little bit of like, have you ever like called someone on the phone and like someone you don't expect picks up, and instead of saying like, who is this, which is like really abrupt, I always say, hi, this is Jeannie. Who am I speaking with? And I think it's kind of the same with the pronouns. I always say like, hi, this is Jeannie. I'm Jeannie. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And then I will say, how may I respectfully refer to you? I don't ask pronouns, because if someone doesn't want to tell me their pronouns, I don't want to put them on the spot. But once I've modeled mine and then I say, how may I refer to you? Most people will then, say, oh, I'm so-and-so, here are my pronouns. So I find that to be the best way to sort of gather that. But we have kind of pulled away from like just blatantly asking everybody their pronouns up front. I think in the real world, that's not really happening. And I think that's probably a good thing. The other little tip that some people don't know, one of the most common bloopers out there that people do that don't realize that they do is when we first started asking people for pronouns, everybody was asking for preferred pronouns. And now actually you really should remove the word preferred. A lot of people don't know that. So basically preferred or, preference implies like you're fond of something. Like I'd like a martini, but a margarita will do, like, and pronouns aren't typically like that. It's like, it's actually part of someone's identity. It's not just something they prefer. And of course, if we apply that wonderful switch it technique, we realize that we don't ask cisgender people what their preferred pronouns are. It's just their pronouns. So if you are still asking people for their preferred pronouns, or you have that written on forms, just remove that preferred and just say, what are your pronouns? That's a tip that a lot of folks aren't familiar with.
That's great. For your future book called The Savvy Ally for Educators, what is the best advice you have for educators to show they are an ally?
I'm all about visibility. I think that because LGBTQ plus people can hide, and they often will if a situation feels unsafe. I have heard unbelievable stories of people who literally feel like their lives have been saved by seeing a safe zone sticker. I tell a story in my book about a young man who was in one of my workshops in Philadelphia years ago, and he was a young gay man, and he said he grew up in a very religious household. Not that all religious households are anti-LGBTQ plus, just got to put it out there. His was, and he went to a very conservative school, and he said he was contemplating suicide, and in his junior year, 2 safe zone stickers. You're familiar with safe zone stickers, folks? It's like, you know, the rainbow stickers, but it kind of implies like the person's had a little bit of training, but whatever. It basically said, you know, I support you, and it had the rainbow. 2 of them popped up in this one hallway that professors had put them outside their door. And he said he would wait until it was dark, and he would go and walk that hallway and gather strength from those stickers. And he said, they saved my life. Just knowing that 2 people, you know, thought I was going to be okay. I'm getting a little teary sharing the story. I mean, the whole workshop, we were all just sobbing. It was ridiculous. But you can do so much, whether you know it or not. Like, the other thing is, he never walked through those doors. He never told those professors what they did for him. They have no idea. And so you have no idea what you do when you put up, you know, just a rainbow that says everyone welcome here, all students welcome here, all families welcome here. You don't even need to have the safe zone sticker, because as I said, that kind of implies training. That it's huge, and you won't necessarily even know the impact that you have when students see that and know that, you know, you're the teacher that thinks they're going to be okay or supports them. So visibility, I think, is so incredibly important. The other thing I'd like to say about visibility is, and this is changing a little bit, but I got my master's in social work in 1992, and in our diversity class, LGBTQ plus folks weren't included. So, like, you know, we talked about race and religion and ability and all sorts of stuff, but LGBTQ plus wasn't included. I'm like, okay, that's 92, right? About 5 years ago, I was out in California actually running a training, and there was a woman who was participating in my workshop, and she said she had just finished her master's in social work 5 years ago. Same thing. Diversity didn't include. So even within diversity conversations, sometimes LGBTQ plus folks are left out. So those signs that you see that say, like, we do not discriminate here, might actually mean except for you, LGBTQ plus folks. So if anyone's wondering, like, well, why can't I just say, you know, I welcome everyone? Having that rainbow, or specifically spelling out, you know, LGBTQ plus is really huge. So, and of course that one's so easy. It's like putting up a little symbol on your website or putting something on your door. So, I mean, of course, I've got a book full of suggestions for you, but but that's one that I think you can do really easily.
Yeah, exactly. This is going to be the last question. What is your favorite takeaway from your book?
Favorite takeaway. I'm not flawless. What I mean by that is, I actually, you know, when someone writes a book, you know, oh, well, they're the expert, they never make any mistakes. And even though I talk about the fact that I make mistakes throughout my book, I can see where people would be like, oh yeah, she knows what she's doing. She never makes a mistake. And I had an actual opportunity sort of late in the writing, one of the final drafts, I suddenly realized I wanted to add this story, and it just made me so happy that I could show that I also make a lot of mistakes. It was around preferred pronouns. So remember, I was just sharing about how, like, you know, now we just remove the preferred. Well, I was actually teaching a workshop on basically, like, it was on, like, how to be an ally and LGBTQ plus inclusion. It was a full day workshop, and we were doing that morning thing where we go around and say our name and pronoun, if you feel, your preferred pronoun if you feel comfortable, is what I had said. This was a while ago. And a woman in a participant said, you know, I really would actually like it if you remove the preferred, because, you know, it's not our preferred. So she basically just explained what I just explained to you. Now, did I take that new piece of information and put it in my lump of knowledge and remove the old piece? No, of course I didn't, because humans are resistant learners. I dismissed it with a nah. And I'm like, I really like to laugh, so I want you to just get the full irony behind this. I was actually teaching a workshop on LGBTQ plus inclusive language. And here I get this piece of information, which I now teach. And I was like, nah, like, you know, So I actually kind of share that again when I'm talking about how resistant people are to learning. I'm not proud of that moment. Obviously I'm not, but I'm fascinated by it. And I was really kind of thankful that I thought of it in time to add it to the book so that people understand that I'm serious when I say that I mess up too. I mess up all the time. One of the things I share, and I'm serious, I mean it, is that being an ally is an ongoing journey of messing up. It really is. You mess up, you make an appropriate apology, you forgive yourself, you figure out how to get it right the next time, and then oops, you mess up again. And that's, you just got to embrace that, because that's what it's about. We learn, we grow, and we're all human. And so, I don't know why that's kind of odd that, my favorite part is that I was sharing my vulnerability, but I kind of like being able to do that.
I appreciate that, the honesty behind that. And, I think for the reader to be able to acknowledge, we all make mistakes and to be able to move on past that. So I really do appreciate that. I wanted to just take a second, if it's okay, to thank the co-sponsors for this event. So one is PFLAG of the San Ramon Valley. So PFLAG advances equality for LGBTQ plus people through 3 pieces: support, education, and advocacy. And I just want to add for our audience that you can visit us at srvpflag.org to receive more information, to learn more. There's also a Facebook page for PFLAG San Ramon Valley. And I also want to thank the San Ramon Valley Diversity Coalition, which seeks to address and advocate for change with diversity, equity, and inclusion issues in the San Ramon Valley. And you can follow us here on this Facebook page. I also want to thank Jeannie for sharing today, and I want to note that the book is available. I looked at Rakestraw Books, which is our local bookstore in Danville, and they do have it on their website. I believe you have to call in order to order it, and I would highly recommend that you look at doing that. I think it would be a great pride gift for yourself or for anyone. I also just want to thank the audience for joining us today. I have to say, as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, how appreciative I am, and I would say we are, of the fact that people want to be allies, and for wanting to take the time to learn more. So I really appreciate that. I also want to note we're holding another event on June 24th that's going to address inclusive language. So that should be really great. There will be more information about that posted here on the Facebook page. So with that, I just want to thank everyone and wish you all a very, very happy Pride. All right, take care, everyone.